Well, I'm pretty sure at this point you've heard the term the Great Resignation. So much has been said and reported about people leaving companies in droves. Just to cover a few of the recent stats, in the United States in 2021, over 47 million people quit their jobs. And it's estimated this year that 41% of the workforce is currently considering leaving. There is definitely a war for talent going on, and companies are panicking. And as one of my previous podcast guests, Beth Pratt, always used to tell me, people leave people, not the organization. So if you're in a leadership role, I think it's important that we recognize the power that you have to turn the great resignation into the great engagement. And I love to find solutions for fixing problems, but to me, it's really important to uncover what is the real problem before we just start tossing out solutions. So why are people resigning? What's going on? There are many reasons, but I want to focus on a few of the top reasons. The first one being burnout. Human beings love to be in a situation where we can control and predict what's going to happen. And exactly how much of the past 2 years have been predictable or controllable? None. Add to that, so much of our everyday life became harder and at times potentially life-threatening. We've had situations where working parents were suddenly thrust into situations where they had to help their children attend school online as well as work from home at the same time. And let me just take a minute to give a shout out to all of the teachers out there. Attempting to help my son with his remote learning confirmed what I knew when I picked my major in college. I was definitely not meant to be a school teacher. Whew, I remember one particular day I was bouncing back and forth between helping my son get on Teams calls for his school and then joining my own Teams calls for work. And I looked at someone on the team during our one-on-one and said, "We weren't meant to do this all at once. We weren't meant to wear all these hats at the same time. It's too much. It's too much." And you had essential workers who were walking into incredibly difficult situations on a daily basis. And then you add to that grief and loss and caregiver fatigue. I remember in the very beginning of the pandemic, everything and everyone was on lockdown. So what did I do? I worked all of the time. There were no boundaries anymore between work and home. It was pretty much just work. And while companies saw a tremendous productivity boost, employees are now starting to feel the impact of all of those hours, extra hours that is, coupled with isolation and everything else I just listed. So very long story short, we're tired. People are exhausted. People are looking for a change and perhaps even an escape for what their life has been like the past few years. The next driver I like to think about and focus on for resignations is a change in priorities, or what I like to refer to as an existential crisis. The pandemic was a wake-up call for many around how precious, fragile, and short life is, and that caused people really to rethink their priorities and what they wanted to get out of life. It created a new perspective from which people evaluated things like their job, and suddenly some people were saying, "I don't like this job anymore, and I don't want to do this anymore." Workers today want to know they're making an impact and making a difference. They want to know that something they're doing has meaning, and the pandemic has lowered people's tolerance for work that didn't provide that to them anymore. Adding on top of that, the pandemic has also brought this advent of remote work. Many people were never given the option to work from home, except for the rare exception and on rare occasion, and suddenly it became their only way to work overnight. Many people loved this, so much so that they said, "Hey, when this is all over, I'm never going back to the office." And then you had some organizations who were saying, we're doing this because we have to. This isn't something you get to decide for yourself in the future. And so now we're in this really interesting situation where I think there's a bit of a power struggle or a power dynamic about who gets to decide and who's in control. And this remote work has become really a hot topic because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about why people want to work remotely, and it's causing tension, especially as offices are opening back up. I could go on and on about why people love the ability to work from home, but I'm just going to focus on a few things here and now. Honestly, the ability to get things done with less distractions is huge for people. And I know open workspaces have a lot of great benefits related to collaboration, but the downside of that is some of the distraction that comes along with it. So people appreciate that ability to get some time away by themselves, to get things done with less distractions. You have greater autonomy and ability to dictate your schedule and the ability to integrate work and home more fluidly. And again, I think that's what we're starting to see with this power struggle is, wait a second, when I was able to work from home, I had greater control over my schedule. I had greater control over determining what my priorities are. By the way, there's a lot of downsides to working from home as well, but for the purposes of today's conversation, I'm only going to focus on the positives and how it relates to engaging and retaining employees because, quite frankly, remote work is your competition in keeping some of your employees, especially if you have an expectation that those employees come into the office some or part of the time. The last thing I'll say about why people are resigning is the fact that there are more opportunities out there and people are seeing other people leave. This is known as what's called the turnover contagion. Very fancy term. But basically, it speaks to the fact that I may not have been interested in leaving my organization, but then so and so left. And I never thought so and so would leave. And I thought so and so was a lifer here. And if so and so's leaving, maybe I should think about it too. And the dominoes just start to fall from there. What's interesting is that we're now far enough along in the Great Resignation that new reports are coming out around how it's working out for everyone. And believe it or not, in a recent survey, 7 out of 10 millennials and Gen Zers said they regretted quitting their jobs. Aha! This is helpful information as we leaders try to figure out how to engage and retain our team. And that's what I want to focus on right now. If you've listened to any other episodes of this podcast, you've likely heard me preach about having one-on-ones with each of your direct reports. I consider this a non-negotiable. And when I say a one-on-one, this is what I mean. I mean a regularly scheduled time where you are talking directly to a direct report and it's just the two of you, not a team meeting, just the one-to-one, face-to-face. And that time is to be used for the employee to talk about things that are on their agenda. So it's not a project status update meeting. It's not an accountability meeting where I, as the leader, say, okay, where are you on all of these items that I've assigned to you and report back to me. That's not what the meeting is. A one-on-one is really sitting down with someone and, again, having a regularly scheduled check-in time with them. It could be weekly. It could be every other week, even once a month. I think that's a little bit too infrequent, but I get it. Sometimes you have such a large team. Maybe that's all you can manage. Once a month is better than nothing. But at any rate, you sit down with that person on a regular schedule and you say, this is your time to talk about the things that are important to you. What questions can I answer for you? How can I help you be more effective in your role? What blockers can I remove from you? These are all the things that can come up in a scheduled one-on-one. And also, oh, by the way, just having an opportunity to check in on people and say, how are you? How's it going? And if you are in a situation where you have remote employees, this is ultra critical because those moments don't happen as much anymore as when we were face to face with each other. We're not just bumping into each other in the hallway anymore if we're all in a remote environment. So it's even more important that you have a scheduled check-in time with someone to see how they're doing because, quite frankly, time passes quickly and you may not realize how long it's been since you actually talked to someone directly on your team. Okay. So that's the definition of a one-on-one. And again, you can use that time to check in with each person on your team about how they're doing. My challenge to you as the leader is to use this time to get curious about the people working on your team. Get curious about who they are, how they're wired, what motivates them, what they struggle with, et cetera, et cetera. And quick disclaimer here, this conversation has to be genuine. If you don't care about how your team is feeling and doing, or if you're going to use this information to punish people instead of help them, or if you don't plan on taking any action with the information you gain from the conversation, then do not bother having a one-on-one. I'm going to assume that if you're listening to this podcast, that disclaimer does not apply to you, so let's move on here. Getting to some more tactical, actionable things, I have a list of questions for you that you can ask during that one-on-one just to get you started. And before I go into this list, if you don't currently have one-on-ones but want to start and you're worried about how that might be perceived, just say to the person, hey, I want to make sure that we have time where I'm getting to hear from you, listen to how you're doing, what types of challenges might exist for you. So I'm going to go ahead and start scheduling a regular check-in time with you. And making sure you understand and explain the why behind it is so important, because that way people realize this is not intended to just check up on you. It's checking in on you. Okay. So here's some questions you can ask during that one-on-one. What do you like most about your current job or role? That's kind of an easy one, right? But here's a little more challenging one. What do you find more draining or irritating about your current job? Could get some good nuggets out of that. Another one, what gets you excited about work every day? Hopefully people are excited, but if they're not, we would want to know that too, right? What areas would you like to grow and develop in over the next 6 to 12 months? Over my career, I've had a lot of opportunities to interview people for potential roles within an organization, and I often ask the question, why are you leaving the current role you're in, or why are you interested in leaving the current organization you're with? And I can tell you 9 times out of 10, they have said to me, I don't have any opportunities for growth. I'm not learning. I'm not growing. I'm not doing anything differently. I'm very limited in terms of where I can go in the organization. And so making sure that you have a sense of where your team wants to grow and develop in the short term as well as the long term. I think a lot of times we ask questions around, what are your career goals? Where would you like to be in 5 to 10 years? Those are helpful questions to ask, but more tactically and specifically, what do you want to grow and develop in over the next 6 to 12 months? And then let's put a plan in place for that. It's really important to know that. If you have people who used to work in an office environment that are now remote, I think a really great question to ask is, what do you miss most about being in the office together? So if they are feeling a loss of some kind, you're going to be able to uncover it with that question. And another great question all along that same line is, what went away with remote work that you hope never returns? So what were those meetings that should have been an email, as an example? What are the things that have actually gotten better going from an office environment to remote work? Really helpful to know their answer to that as well. I've talked in previous podcasts about leaders that I've had who will ask the question, how can I be a more effective leader for you? And I think that is a great question to ask, because oftentimes an employee may have feedback for you, but they're not comfortable just approaching you and saying, I have some feedback to share about you. Given that you're my boss, that might be a little bit of an awkward conversation to have. So if you open the door for them, oftentimes they do have ideas that they're able to share. Last but not least, the granddaddy of them all, this is a biggie. If you were applying for this job now, knowing what you know about it today, would you still apply for the role? Why or why not? Whew, that can be a very loaded question. Don't ask this one if you're not ready for the answer, but again, hugely important to know the answers to those questions. So that's just a few things you can ask during a one-on-one. But keep in mind, these questions really rely on a positive, trusting, and safe relationship with your team, because they're not going to be open if they don't have high levels of trust in you. And if you're not quite there yet, that's okay. Even just asking a question like, how are you doing today? No, really, how are you doing? That's a great starting point. Having a more regular check-in, a scheduled check-in with your employee, will also help to build the relationship with them so that you can get to the point where you are asking some of those tougher questions and getting deeper insight from them. So all of those things you can do during just a one-on-one conversation. If you're just able to implement one or enhance one-on-ones you're already having, that's great in terms of getting greater engagement and retention. But there are some other things you can do, and I think tips just to keep in mind in general. I think it's important that we acknowledge this turnover contagion that's happening. And sometimes I'm so fascinated by how often leaders want to dance around an elephant in the room. And I often will say, just address it. So having a conversation like, hey, I know we've had several people leave from our department over the past few months. And not only has that resulted in each of you taking on extra work as we recruit replacements, but these people were also your friends in many cases. How's that impacted you? I want you to know that you're valued here because you bring these very specific things to the table. Insert very specific things that they bring to the table. And I don't want you to leave. I'm curious if you're comfortable sharing with me, what is it that could possibly make you click on the apply button for a job outside of this company? What is it that would potentially draw you away from this role or this organization? Are you willing to share that with me? Because I don't want that to happen. Again, it might make you feel uncomfortable saying it, but I think it's important just to acknowledge what's going on right now. And especially if you think employees have specific expectations that you're not going to be able to meet, try to figure out what those expectations are. Don't try to manage to a hidden expectation. Get it out there. Talk about it. I alluded to this through a previous example, but it's really important to think about how someone's job has changed and evolved since they started in the role. As a result of downsizing and other changes that happen, oftentimes that impacts the work that employees are doing. And many might be saying, wait a second, I didn't sign up for this. This is not the job that I agreed to. These are not the hours that I agreed to. The list can go on. But sometimes there's an evolution that's so gradual and so slow that we don't realize how materially things have changed from when someone first started in a position. And again, a lot of times that's impacted by maybe I hired you to do a very specific job, and then unfortunately I had to let some people go on the team, and now you've picked up some of their work too. And that wasn't a part of the original job posting, and that wasn't a part of the original job description. And oh, by the way, I'm likely not paying you more money to do that either. And so that can cause a lot of frustration from an employee's perspective. So it's important to be aware of that. And again, that's why I love that tough question of, if you knew what you know about the role today when you applied for it, would you still apply for it? That's where you can start understanding that a little bit better. If you listen to the previous episode on Clifton Strengths, you'll know that if people are able to do what they do best more than 60% of the time, they're likelier to be more engaged in their role. So think for a minute about each of your direct reports. How often are they getting to use their strengths? Do you know what their strengths are? Do they know what their strengths are? This doesn't take a lot of time or money to evaluate these things, but it can be hugely impactful in terms of their engagement and retention. And if people on your team are feeling burnout, remember, that's one of the top drivers for resignations. If they're feeling burnout, they may not need to leave the company to get relief. They may just need a break or a change from the status quo. There's a lot of people I know that have received severance packages that are really excited initially at the prospect of doing nothing and, just kind of hanging out. But eventually they start to get antsy and they want to work. And the time frame on that varies for people, but usually it's longer than 1 to 2 weeks, which is often the maximum amount of time someone takes at any given point for a vacation. There are companies out there that are offering paid sabbaticals or even unpaid leaves of absences where people can still get their benefits while they take up to a year break from work. And I know at this point I may have lost some of you because you're thinking that sounds great, Laura, but that's some sort of dream world scenario that I could never do in my company or organization. But look it up. Companies are doing it. And if you can't, think about how you can mix things up for people. Maybe you could have 2 employees switch jobs for a few weeks or a few months. There could be a significant cross-training benefit there, and it gives them an opportunity just to kind of mix it up, change the status quo, do something different. You could just ask people on your team what ideas they have for alleviating burnout. And again, this is another great question to ask during a one-on-one. You'll be surprised with what people come up with. I know these solutions have to be specific to what works for you and your organization. So what I'm trying to do is just plant some seeds here to see what might grow for you at your respective organization. Another thing to look at is your culture. You may be tired of hearing it, but culture really does eat strategy for breakfast. And the interesting thing about culture is that many leaders think there's only one culture, and that's the overall quote unquote corporate culture of the organization. But I will tell you, there are many subcultures that live within an organization. Each department, each leader creates their own subculture, and it might not be aligned to what the overall organizational culture is or what you want it to be. This could be a whole other podcast episode, and maybe it will be. So I'll just say that if you're in a top leadership role within an organization, it's worth investing in determining how aligned everyone, every department, and every leader is to the culture. Last thing I'll say is that if you do have someone that resigns from your team, allow them to do it gracefully. I always used to tell people, I don't negotiate and try to get people to stay once they've made the decision to leave. And here's why. It's often a very difficult decision to leave a role, a leader, a team, a department, a company. And once you've made that decision, you've already committed to leaving. So if I try to get you to stay, if I throw more money at you, which many of us try to do, that may make you feel better in the moment, but then the next bad day you have, the next bad interaction you have, you're going to be saying to yourself, I knew I should have left. I knew I should have gone to that other company. And I don't want to compete with the ghost of that job you wanted but didn't go after, because I ultimately want people to be happy. And my hope is that their happiness is here in the current organization. But I also need to recognize that sometimes they're better moving on someplace else. So my advice to them and what I have said to employees in the past is go be happy. And ultimately, that's what I want for you. And if this is what it takes for you to be happy, then I wish you all the best. If you treat people and the decisions they make with respect, keep in mind, you have little ambassadors walking out the door, and you never know how they may be able to positively impact your organization, even if it's from the outside instead of the inside. So there you have it. Just a few thoughts on the Great Resignation and the Great Engagement and the Great Retention and all of the other things that are to come with great in front of them. Honestly, I could go on and on with this topic for hours. We've really just scratched the surface here. But remember, you do have the ability to influence others' success, and it's not just through pay. Get curious, take the time to learn about each of your employees, and then get creative about how you can create an environment they don't want to leave.